My name is Audrey and I'm 34 years old. Standing here in the marble lobby of the Grandview Hotel, I still get chills remembering what happened at last night's charity gala. The simple black cocktail dress I wore hangs in my office, now a reminder of the moment everything changed. They called me worthless trash in this very ballroom right under these crystal chandeliers that I personally selected from Venice 3 years ago. Before I tell you about that unforgettable night, where are you watching from? Please hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever felt underestimated. Let me take you back to 24 hours ago, when I made a decision that would expose the truth about who really owns this place. The Grandview Hotel stands 45 stories tall in the heart of Manhattan, its glass facade reflecting the city's skyline like a mirror to the soul of New York itself. Every morning for the past 5 years, I've walked through these doors, but not as the owner everyone expects to see. My grandmother, Eleanor Richardson, left me this empire when she passed, but I chose to keep my identity secret, working under my mother's maiden name, Audrey Mills, learning the business from the ground up. The hotel represents more than just luxury accommodations. It houses 420 rooms, 3 Michelin-starred restaurants, a rooftop garden that overlooks Central Park, and a legacy my grandmother built from nothing after my grandfather died in the Korean War. She started with a small boarding house in Brooklyn and turned it into this. Every marble tile, every piece of art, every thread in the Persian rugs tells her story of determination. Yesterday morning started like any other. I reviewed the quarterly reports in my private office, accessible only through a hidden elevator behind the concierge desk. My executive team knows me, of course, but to the rest of the world, I'm just another employee. This arrangement has taught me invaluable lessons about how people treat those they perceive as beneath them. The invitation to the Manhattan Elite Foundation Gala had arrived 2 weeks prior. They wanted to host their annual charity auction in our grand ballroom, and I'd approved it personally, though, anonymously. The foundation raises money for underprivileged youth, a cause close to my heart, since my grandmother often told me stories of her own impoverished childhood. I decided to attend not as the hidden owner, but as myself, or rather, the version of myself the world sees. No designer gown, no diamond necklace worth more than most people's homes, no entourage of assistants. I wanted to observe to see how these philanthropists behaved when they thought no one important was watching. The afternoon of the gala, I went to Target. Yes, Target. I found a simple black dress for $40, paired it with shoes I'd worn to my cousin's wedding 3 years ago, and my grandmother's simple pearl earrings. The only expensive thing I wore, though, no one would recognize their value. They were gifts from my grandfather, bought with his first paycheck after returning from the war. I drove myself to the hotel in my Honda Accord, the one I use for everyday errands. The valet Marcus, who's worked here for 8 years, did a double take when he saw me. He knows who I am, of course. I smiled and put a finger to my lips. He nodded understanding immediately. Before entering the ballroom, I stopped by the staff break room. Maria, our events manager, was briefing the service team. She saw me and raised an eyebrow. I'd texted her earlier, letting her know I'd be attending incognito. She's one of 12 employees who know my true identity, all of whom I trust implicitly. The transformation of the ballroom always takes my breath away. Tonight was no exception. 20,000 roses imported from Ecuador lined the walls. The chandeliers, each weighing over a ton, sparkled with 50,000 crystals that we clean by hand twice a year. The auction items donated by various sponsors were displayed on velvet pedestals around the room. A string quartet played Vivaldi in the corner. As I entered through the main doors, I felt a mixture of pride and anticipation. Pride because this was my hotel showing its finest face. Anticipation because I knew tonight would be educational, though I had no idea just how much. The first hour passed pleasantly enough. I mingled with various guests, most of whom ignored me after the briefest of introductions. When you dress simply at these events, you become invisible like part of the furniture. I sipped champagne and listened to conversations about vacation homes in the Hamptons' private jets and complaints about how hard it was to find good help these days. It was near the chocolate fountain imported from Belgium specifically for this event that I first encountered them. Margaret Whitmore, wife of a prominent hedge fund CEO, stood with a circle of women, each draped in designer gowns that cost more than most Americans make in a year. Her diamonds caught the light aggressively, almost demanding attention. Beside her stood Jessica Sterling, an influencer with 3 million followers who documented every moment of her charmed life. Her phone never left her hand, constantly capturing content for her audience. Next to Jessica was Patricia Kensington, heiress to a real estate empire that owned half of the Upper East Side. I approached the chocolate fountain just as Patricia was describing her recent trip to Monaco. She paused mid-sentence when she saw me, her eyes scanning my outfit with obvious disdain. Jessica turned to follow Patricia's gaze and actually laughed. Not a polite chuckle, but a genuine laugh of surprise. She held up her phone, and I heard the distinctive sound of a photo being taken. The fountain was elaborate 5 tiers of cascading Belgian chocolate with an array of fruits and pastries for dipping. I reached for a strawberry, just as Jessica moved closer, her elbow knocking into my hand. The collision sent her glass of red wine splashing across my dress, the burgundy liquid spreading across the black fabric like blood. She gasped dramatically, her hand flying to her mouth. But I saw the smile in her eyes, the satisfaction of a mean girl who just executed a perfect strike. Margaret stepped forward, tissue in hand, but not to help me. She dabbed at a tiny droplet that had landed on Jessica's shoe. Patricia handed Jessica a fresh glass of wine while completely ignoring my existence. I remained calm, using my napkin to blot the wine. The dress was ruined, of course, but that didn't matter. What mattered was the lesson being taught. These women felt so secure in their superiority that they could treat another human being like this without consequence. A server appeared immediately with towels. It was James, who'd worked in our banquet department for 2 years. He was working his way through culinary school, and I'd personally approved his scholarship from our employee education fund, though he didn't know that. He looked mortified as he helped me clean up, whispering apologies as if it were his fault. Margaret waved him away dismissively, actually snapping her fingers at him. I watched James's jaw tighten, but he maintained his professional composure. I made a mental note to give him a raise. The women resumed their conversation as if nothing had happened, as if I wasn't standing there with wine staining my dress. They discussed the auction items, particularly a week at a private island resort that Patricia was determined to win. I stood there for a moment longer, observing them. These were women who prided themselves on their charity work, who would bid hundreds of thousands of dollars tonight for underprivileged youth, yet couldn't show basic kindness to someone they perceived as beneath them. Moving away from the fountain, I encountered more of the same throughout the room. A group of tech executives completely ignored me when I tried to join their conversation about artificial intelligence, a subject I'm quite knowledgeable about given our hotel's recent implementation of smart room technology. A fashion designer actually asked me to fetch her a drink, assuming I was part of the service staff. Each slight, each dismissive look, each assumption added to my resolve. These people moved through the world in a bubble of privilege, never seeing the people who made their comfort possible. They donated to charity for the tax breaks and social capital, not from genuine compassion. As I watched them, I noticed something else. My actual employees, the ones serving drinks and clearing plates, were being treated terribly. One banker actually threw his napkin on the floor just to watch a server pick it up. A woman complained loudly that her champagne wasn't cold enough, demanding the server bring her a fresh glass immediately, even though the one she held was perfectly chilled. I moved through the room like a ghost, invisible but observing everything. The string quartet played beautifully, but no one acknowledged them. The ice sculpture, which our kitchen team had spent 8 hours creating, served merely as a backdrop for selfies. Then I overheard something that made my blood run cold. Harrison Blake, CEO of Blake Investments, was loudly discussing his plans to pressure several luxury hotels, including mine, to cut staff benefits to increase profit margins for investors. He didn't know that the Grandview was privately owned, that I answered to no one but myself. His companion, Richard Thornton, who owned a chain of restaurants notorious for underpaying workers, laughed and agreed. They discussed workers as if they were expenses to be minimized, not people with families and dreams. I thought of Maria, who'd started as a housekeeper and worked her way up to events manager while raising 3 kids alone. I thought of Marcus, the valet who was putting his daughter through medical school. I thought of James staying up late to study after working 12-hour shifts. These thoughts were interrupted when Patricia Kensington's voice cut through the air. She was complaining to the foundation's president about the quality of applicants for their scholarship program, saying that perhaps they should raise the bar since so many undeserving people were trying to take advantage of the system. The irony wasn't lost on me. Patricia had inherited everything she had never working a day in her life, yet she felt qualified to judge who deserved help. I was standing near the auction display, admiring a beautiful painted portrait donated by a local artist, when I felt eyes on me. Turning, I found Margaret Whitmore staring at me with undisguised contempt. The confrontation began innocently enough. Harrison Blake approached me near the silent auction tables, where I was genuinely interested in a signed first edition of Maya Angelou's autobiography. He glanced at my bidding number, then at my dress still stained with wine despite my attempts to clean it. His voice boomed across the space between us, drawing attention from nearby guests. He asked what I did for a living, his tone suggesting he already knew I didn't belong. I responded simply that I worked in hospitality, which was true. I didn't elaborate, curious to see where this would lead. Richard Thornton materialized beside Harrison, bourbon in hand, his face already flushed from drinking. He heard my response and actually snorted the sound ugly and dismissive. Harrison's reaction was even worse. He laughed, the sound echoing off the ballroom's high ceiling. He repeated my words mockingly, turning to address the growing audience around us. A server in hospitality, he announced, as if I'd confessed to something shameful. Richard added his own commentary, wondering aloud how someone like me had even gotten into the event. His implication was clear. I was an interloper, a pretender, someone who'd snuck into a world where I didn't belong. The crowd around us grew. I saw faces I recognized from Forbes magazine, from charity galas, photographed in the society pages, from business journals I read religiously. They all wore the same expression of amused superiority. Jessica Sterling appeared with her phone live streaming the encounter to her millions of followers. She narrated the scene like a nature documentary, describing the rare sight of someone clearly out of their element, trying to mingle with their betters. I remained calm, my hands steady at my sides. Years of boardroom negotiations had taught me the power of silence, of letting others reveal themselves through their words. Patricia Kensington pushed through the crowd, her voice cutting like a knife. She suggested that perhaps security should check how I'd gotten in, that there might have been some mistake with the guest list. The foundation's event coordinator, a nervous woman named Barbara, actually approached with an iPad, frantically scrolling through names. She looked at me apologetically, but still asked for my invitation. I produced it from my clutch, the official invitation addressed to A. Mills, with a +1 I hadn't used. Barbara verified it, looking confused, but confirming I was indeed invited. This validation didn't satisfy Margaret Whitmore. She stepped forward, her diamonds glittering like weapons in the light. Her voice rose above the murmur of the crowd, each word deliberate and cutting. She spoke about declining standards, about how events like these used to mean something. She gestured at my dress, at my simple appearance, and delivered the words that would change everything. She called me worthless trash. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. She continued saying that people like me diluted the quality of these gatherings, that we didn't understand the importance of maintaining certain standards. The ballroom fell silent. Even the string quartet seemed to pause between movements. All eyes were on me, waiting for my response. Some faces showed embarrassment at Margaret's cruelty, but no one spoke up. No one defended me. Jessica's phone captured every second, her followers commenting in real time. I could see the hearts and laughing emojis floating up her screen. The humiliation was being broadcast to millions. Harrison tried to soften the blow with false kindness, suggesting that perhaps I'd be more comfortable at a different kind of event, something more suited to my station. His condescension was worse than Margaret's cruelty, because he genuinely thought he was being helpful. Richard muttered something about checking if I'd stolen anything loud enough for everyone to hear, but quiet enough to maintain plausible deniability if challenged. I looked around the room, making eye contact with each person. Some looked away, uncomfortable but complicit. Others stared back defiantly, standing with their tribe against the outsider. Among the service staff, I saw different expressions. Maria stood near the kitchen entrance, her face tight with controlled anger. James had stopped clearing glasses, his hands clenched around his serving tray. Marcus had somehow appeared inside, probably alerted by the staff network that something was happening. These were my people, the ones who really mattered, the ones who kept this hotel running while people like Margaret Whitmore complained about champagne temperature. I took a breath, feeling the weight of my grandmother's pearl earrings, remembering her words about dignity and grace under pressure. She'd faced worse than this building her empire. She'd been dismissed and diminished countless times, but she'd never let them see her break. Patricia suggested that perhaps I should leave before causing more embarrassment. She said it sweetly as if doing me a favor, but the cruelty was unmistakable. The crowd began to shift, ready to move on to the next entertainment, having had their fun with the outsider. But I wasn't done, not even close. I walked slowly toward the stage where the auction would be held. My footsteps echoed in the silence, each step deliberate and measured. The crowd parted, probably thinking I was leaving in shame. Instead, I climbed the 3 steps to the stage. The auctioneer who'd been preparing his notes looked up in surprise. I whispered something to him, and his eyes widened. He knew who I was, had worked with my team to organize this event. He handed me the microphone without hesitation. Standing under the spotlights, I could see everyone clearly. Margaret Whitmore stood front and center, her expression shifting from smug satisfaction to confusion. Jessica Sterling had her phone trained on me, streaming live to her followers. Harrison and Richard stood together, probably thinking I was about to embarrass myself further. I began speaking, my voice calm and steady through the sound system. I thanked the Manhattan Elite Foundation for hosting their gala at this beautiful venue. I thanked the staff for their impeccable service, despite the challenging behavior of some guests. Then I thanked Margaret Whitmore, specifically letting her words echo through the ballroom. I repeated them slowly, clearly, making sure everyone understood what had been said. "Worthless trash," I said, letting the words hang in the air. The room shifted uncomfortably. Some people pulled out their phones, sensing something momentous was about to happen. Others moved closer to the stage, drawn by the drama. I introduced myself properly for the first time that evening. Audrey Richardson, I said, owner and sole proprietor of the Grandview Hotel. The ballroom where you stand the champagne, you're drinking the very ground beneath your feet, all mine. The silence was absolute. Margaret's face drained of color, her diamonds suddenly looking gaudy rather than elegant. Jessica's phone shook in her hand, her followers going wild in the comments. I continued explaining how I'd inherited the hotel from my grandmother, Eleanor Richardson. Some of the older guests recognized the name, remembered the articles about her, the legendary woman who'd built a hotel empire from nothing. To prove my claim, I began listing details only the owner would know. The exact cost of the chandeliers down to the cent, the thread count of the napkins they were using, the name of the company in Ecuador that provided the roses, and exactly how much we paid for them. I called out to Maria, asking her to confirm my identity. She stepped forward, her voice clear and professional, confirming that I was indeed the owner. James followed suit, then Marcus, then a dozen other employees who knew the truth. Harrison Blake's mouth hung open. Richard Thornton had dropped his bourbon, the glass shattering on the marble floor. Patricia Kensington looked like she might faint. But I wasn't finished. I explained how I'd chosen to attend incognito, to see how people behaved when they thought no one important was watching. I'd learned so much, I said, about the character of the city's elite. I pointed out specific incidents from the evening. The banker who'd thrown his napkin on the floor. The woman who'd complained about perfectly good champagne. Harrison's plans to pressure hotels to cut employee benefits. Each revelation landed like a physical blow. Then I addressed Margaret directly. I told her that the Grandview had standards just as she'd mentioned. Standards that included treating every person with respect and dignity. Standards that she and her friends had failed to meet. I made my first executive decision of the evening. Those who had shown such contempt for others were no longer welcome at the Grandview. Not for events, not for dinner, not even for coffee in our lobby cafe. Lifetime bans effective immediately. My security team moved into position. They didn't approach aggressively but stood ready. The message was clear. Margaret tried to speak, to apologize, to explain, but I held up my hand for silence. Apologies now were meaningless, prompted only by the revelation of my identity. Where was her kindness when she thought I was nobody? Jessica had lowered her phone, trying to delete the live stream, but it was too late. Her followers had screen recorded everything. The hashtags were already forming. Within minutes, the story would be everywhere. I announced my second decision. The Grandview would donate $500,000 to the Manhattan Elite Foundation, but with conditions. The money would specifically fund scholarships for hospitality workers, the people they'd dismissed as unworthy. Furthermore, I would personally oversee the selection process to ensure truly deserving candidates were chosen. The foundation's president, Daniel Morrison, nodded eagerly from the audience, probably calculating how this scandal could actually benefit the charity if handled correctly. I then addressed the staff, my real family at the Grandview. I announced immediate raises for the entire service team, retroactive for the past year. I established a new employee dignity policy stating that any guest who mistreated staff would be permanently banned. The reactions varied wildly. Some guests applauded, perhaps genuinely moved, or perhaps trying to distance themselves from the offenders. Others looked uncomfortable, probably recognizing their own behavior in my descriptions. Margaret Whitmore made one last attempt to salvage the situation. She approached the stage, her voice shaking, insisting this was all a misunderstanding. She claimed she hadn't meant what she'd said, that it was taken out of context. I asked her a simple question. If I had really been just a hospitality worker, would that have made her words acceptable? Would that have justified calling another human being worthless trash? She had no answer. There was no answer that wouldn't further condemn her. I concluded my speech by sharing my grandmother's favorite quote. True class isn't about what you wear or what you own, but how you treat people who can do nothing for you. The spotlights felt less harsh now, more like sunshine breaking through clouds. I stood there for a moment, letting the weight of the revelation settle over the room. Then I walked off the stage, my head high, my grandmother's pearls catching the light. The crowd parted again, but differently this time. Some reached out trying to shake my hand to make contact with me. I ignored them all, walking straight to Maria and my team. Security began escorting the banned guests toward the exit. Margaret Whitmore protested loudly, threatening lawsuits, claiming she knew people who could ruin me. Harrison Blake tried to negotiate, offering business deals, claiming it was all a joke. Jessica Sterling was in tears, not from remorse, but from watching her follower count plummet in real time as people unfollowed in droves. Her carefully curated image as a luxury influencer was crumbling. The remaining guests stood in shocked clusters, discussing what they'd witnessed. Some were already on their phones, calling spouses friends. Anyone who would listen to this incredible story. The auction continued, but the atmosphere had fundamentally changed. People bid generously, probably trying to curry favor or distance themselves from the scandal. The foundation raised more money than ever before, though I wondered how much was genuine charity versus damage control. The immediate aftermath was chaotic. Within an hour, the story had exploded across social media. The hashtag #WorthlessTrashToHotelOwner was trending nationally. News vans appeared outside the hotel, reporters eager for interviews. I retreated to my office, the hidden sanctuary on the 45th floor. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the city lights, each one representing thousands of stories, thousands of people just trying to make their way. Daniel Morrison knocked on my door. The foundation's president was a decent man who'd inherited a position in a problematic organization. He entered with obvious embarrassment, apologizing profusely for the behavior of his donors. We talked for an hour about restructuring the foundation's events, implementing codes of conduct, creating more inclusive environments. He was eager to make changes, partly from genuine conviction and partly from self-preservation. The scandal could destroy the foundation or transform it. I proposed a new model where scholarship recipients would be included in galas as guests of honor, not just success stories to parade for donors. They would have seats at the table, voices in the conversation. Daniel agreed to everything, probably would have agreed to anything at that moment, but I sensed real possibility for change. Sometimes it takes a crisis to create opportunity. After he left, Maria entered with coffee and a knowing smile. She'd been my confidant for years, one of the few who knew my identity from the beginning. She sat across from me and we debriefed like soldiers after a battle. She told me about the staff's reactions, how they'd cheered in the break room when I'd announced their raises. She mentioned that James had actually cried knowing the extra money would help with his culinary school expenses. Thomas, our head of security, knocked and entered. He reported that the band guests had all left without physical incident, though Margaret Whitmore had promised to destroy me and my hotel. He seemed amused rather than concerned. The overnight audit manager brought me printouts of online discussions. The story had reached Reddit, Twitter, TikTok, every platform. Opinions varied, but most supported my actions. Former service workers shared their own stories of mistreatment by the wealthy. Some criticized me for the deception, saying I'd set them up. But most understood that I'd simply revealed who they really were. Their behavior was their choice, not my manipulation. Around 2 in the morning, my phone rang. It was Christopher, my lawyer, and one of the few people who knew everything about my business. He'd been fielding calls from other lawyers' threats of lawsuits, attempts at negotiation. He wasn't worried. The band guests had no legal standing. The hotel was private property, and I had the right to refuse service. The live stream Jessica had created actually worked in our favor, providing evidence of their behavior. We discussed potential backlash boycotts from the wealthy elite, negative reviews from their connections. But Christopher pointed out something important. For every enemy I'd made among the 1%, I'd gained thousands of supporters among regular people. The hotel's social media accounts were flooded with supportive messages. People were booking rooms specifically to support us. The restaurant reservation system crashed from overwhelming traffic. By dawn, several news outlets had published in-depth pieces about the incident. Business journals analyzed the potential impact on the luxury hospitality industry. Social commentators discussed wealth inequality and class consciousness. I hadn't slept, but I wasn't tired. There was too much adrenaline, too much to process. I walked through the hotel as the morning shift arrived, greeting employees who looked at me with new recognition. In the employee cafeteria, I found a group of housekeepers discussing the night's events. They fell silent when they saw me, but I asked them to continue. They shared their own experiences with difficult guests, the daily indignities they faced with grace. I made another decision. We would implement a monthly forum where staff could share concerns directly with me, no filters, no middle management. Their voices would shape hotel policy going forward. The breakfast service in the main restaurant was busier than usual. Guests kept approaching me, some supportive, others clearly uncomfortable. A few actually asked for selfies, which felt surreal. One elderly woman, a regular guest for 20 years, took my hand and shared her own story. She'd built a successful business in the 70s when women weren't welcome in boardrooms. She understood the importance of what I'd done. Back in my office, I found hundreds of emails. Some were threats from Margaret's lawyers, Harrison's business associates, Patricia's society friends. But most were supportive from hotel workers worldwide, from people who'd faced similar discrimination. One email stood out. It was from a young woman named Sarah, who worked at a competing hotel. She described daily harassment from wealthy guests, the constant dehumanization. My actions had given her hope that things could change. I decided to establish a hospitality workers alliance, a support network for those in our industry. We would share resources, provide legal support, and create standards for dignified treatment across all luxury establishments. The implications rippled outward. Other hotel owners called, some supportive, others warning me about disrupting the established order. I told them the order needed disrupting. The next morning brought unexpected developments. Margaret Whitmore had sent a 3-page handwritten apology delivered by courier at dawn. Her handwriting was shaky, probably from emotion or exhaustion. She claimed deep remorse, promised to examine her behavior, offered to donate $1 million to the employee fund I'd established. I read it carefully, looking for sincerity between the lines of obvious desperation. Her social standing had crumbled overnight. The charity board she sat on were distancing themselves. The country club had suspended her membership pending review. I had my assistant send a polite but firm response. The ban would remain. Actions had consequences, and wealth couldn't buy absolution. However, I suggested she volunteer at a homeless shelter. Learn what real worthlessness felt like. Understand that dignity isn't determined by bank accounts. Jessica Sterling tried a different approach. Her manager contacted me with a proposal for a redemption arc, a documentary about privilege and personal growth. She wanted to film at the hotel interview, me turn the whole incident into content. The audacity was breathtaking. She wanted to profit from her cruelty, transform humiliation into monetization. I declined without explanation. Some people never truly learned. Harrison Blake sent lawyers, then business proposals, then finally came himself. He stood in my office still arrogant despite his situation trying to negotiate. He offered to invest in hotel expansions, promised to champion workers' rights, claimed he'd been misunderstood. I let him talk, studying the man who'd planned to pressure hotels into cutting employee benefits. When he finished, I asked him to name 5 of my employees. He couldn't name one. He'd been here dozens of times for events, but never saw the people serving him. Richard Thornton took a different tack, attempting to circumvent the ban through connections. He had friends call politicians advocate for him, even tried booking under false names. Each attempt was blocked, my security team vigilant. Meanwhile, the positive responses multiplied exponentially. A group of boutique hotel owners reached out about forming an alliance committed to employee dignity. They wanted to implement similar policies, create an industry standard. We scheduled a summit for the following month. 20 hotels committed immediately, representing thousands of workers who would benefit from enhanced protections and respect. The scholarship fund grew beyond my initial donation. Other philanthropists, perhaps sensing the shifting winds, contributed generously. Within a week, we had $3 million earmarked for hospitality workers' education. Local colleges reached out about partnerships, offering specialized programs for our scholarship recipients. The mayor's office called about a citywide initiative inspired by our example. But the most meaningful responses came from my own employees. They shared stories I'd never heard, thanked me for seeing them, for valuing them. Many had worked in hospitality for decades, accepting mistreatment as part of the job. Now they felt empowered to demand better. Maria organized a celebration for the staff, a private party in the ballroom where everything had happened. No guests, no pretense, just the people who made the Grandview special. I attended not as the owner, but as part of the family. We danced where millionaires had sneered. We laughed where cruelty had reigned. We reclaimed the space with joy. James, the server who'd helped clean the wine for my dress, approached me during the party. He'd received his scholarship confirmation that day. The money would cover his entire culinary program. He could quit his second job, focus on his studies. His gratitude was overwhelming, but I told him he'd earned it through hard work and dignity. The scholarship was recognition, not charity. He promised to pay it forward, to remember where he came from when he succeeded. The valet Marcus shared that his daughter had seen the video, called him crying with pride. She was in her 3rd year of medical school, inspired by her father's work ethic. Now she was even prouder, knowing he worked for someone who valued him. The housekeeping supervisor, Elena, who'd been with the hotel 15 years, told me about the immediate change in guest behavior. Word had spread about our zero-tolerance policy. The entitled attitudes had noticeably decreased. These conversations continued throughout the party. Each employee had a story, a moment when they'd been diminished, dismissed, dehumanized. But also moments of resilience, pride, quiet triumph. A week later, I held the first monthly forum. The ballroom was packed, every shift represented. The discussions were honest, sometimes painful, but productive. We identified problems I hadn't known existed, implemented solutions suggested by the people actually doing the work. One housekeeper suggested a dignity bell, something to ring when a guest crossed the line. It sounds silly, but the symbolism mattered. Knowing they could call out mistreatment, that management would support them, changed everything. The ripple effects continued. Other businesses in the building implemented similar policies. The Restaurant Workers Union cited our example in negotiations. Hotels across the country reported increased job applications, people wanting to work where they'd be respected. 3 weeks after the gala, a documentary filmmaker contacted me. Not for sensationalism, but to explore the larger issues of class, dignity, and power in America. I agreed, but only if my employees' stories were centered. The interviews were powerful. Maria talked about raising her children while working 60-hour weeks, never complaining when guests treated her like furniture. Marcus discussed the PhD he'd abandoned because he needed immediate income for his family. These weren't just workers. They were parents, students, dreamers, survivors. They had rich inner lives that entitled guests never bothered to discover. Sitting now in my office 6 months later, the city sprawled before me in the evening light. I reflect on how that one night changed everything. The wine stain never came out of that $40 dress, but I had it framed, hung in my office as a reminder. The Grandview has become more than a luxury hotel. It's a symbol of dignity and service proof that businesses can thrive while treating employees as humans deserving respect. Our occupancy rates have never been higher, filled with guests who appreciate our values. The scholarship fund has supported 30 students so far, all pursuing dreams that seemed impossible while working minimum wage. They send updates, photos from graduations, job offers they've received. Each success story validates my grandmother's legacy. The band guests have found ways to adapt. Margaret Whitmore surprisingly did volunteer at that homeless shelter. She sent another letter not asking for forgiveness, but sharing what she'd learned. Perhaps people can change given enough pressure and time. Jessica Sterling pivoted to lifestyle content about ethical consumption, though her follower count never recovered. Harrison Blake's investment firm faced scrutiny about their treatment of service workers across their portfolio companies. Richard Thornton sold his restaurant chain after multiple employee lawsuits surfaced, inspired by our stand. But these individual consequences matter less than the systemic change. The Hospitality Alliance now includes 60 hotels nationwide. We've established industry standards for employee treatment, created a support network for workers facing discrimination. Law schools have contacted me about case studies examining whether dignity at work should be a legal right rather than employer discretion. The conversation has shifted from whether workers deserve respect to how to guarantee it. My employees no longer accept disrespect as occupational hazard. They stand taller, speak up more, knowing their worth isn't determined by their job title. The culture has transformed from the ground up. I think often of my grandmother Eleanor, who built this empire while facing her own discrimination as a woman in business. She taught me that true power isn't about dominating others, but lifting them up. Her pearls, which I still wear daily, remind me that real value isn't flashy or loud. The wine stain on that dress was supposed to be my humiliation, my put down, my reminder that I didn't belong. Instead, it became the catalyst for revelation, not just of my identity, but of the ugly truth beneath the glamorous surface of high society. Every morning when I walk through the lobby, I see the same marble floors, the same crystal chandeliers, the same velvet curtains. But everything feels different now. The hotel breathes with dignity, operates with purpose beyond profit. The staff greet me not with deference, but with genuine warmth. We're colleagues in a shared mission, creating a space where luxury doesn't require cruelty, where service doesn't mean servitude. Young people reach out constantly, asking for advice about standing up to power, about creating change in their own workplaces. I tell them what my grandmother told me: real change requires courage, conviction, and the willingness to risk comfort for principle. That night at the gala, when Margaret Whitmore called me worthless trash, she thought she was stating a fact about my value. She couldn't have been more wrong. My worth was never determined by her words, her diamonds, or her disdain. True worth comes from how we treat others, when we think no one important is watching. It comes from seeing humanity in everyone, regardless of their role or status. It comes from using whatever power we have to protect those who have less. The Grandview stands as testament to these values now. Every policy, every decision, every interaction reflects our commitment to dignity. We've proved that business can be both profitable and principled. I've received offers to sell astronomical sums from corporations wanting to capitalize on our reputation. They promise to maintain our values, but I know better. Values can't be bought or sold. They must be lived, defended, chosen daily. So I remain the owner who went undercover, who exposed the ugliness of entitlement, who chose employees over easy relationships with the wealthy. Some still call me radical, a troublemaker, a disruptor. I wear these labels with pride. The employee forum last week focused on expanding benefits, creating opportunities for advancement, ensuring the Grandview remains a place where careers flourish, not just survive. The ideas were brilliant, innovative, possible because the people presenting them weren't afraid anymore. James, who cleaned wine from my dress that night, is graduating from culinary school next month. He'll be starting as a sous chef in one of our restaurants. The executive chef, who once would have dismissed him as just another server, now mentors him personally. Marcus's daughter graduated medical school with honors. She's doing her residency at Mount Sinai, plans to establish a clinic for hospitality workers who often can't afford health care. The cycle of dignity continues. Maria was promoted to vice president of operations, the first person from housekeeping to reach executive level in our hotel's history. She brings perspective that business school never could have taught. These aren't just feel-good stories. They're proof that when you value people properly, everyone succeeds. The hotel's profits have increased because motivated, respected employees create exceptional experiences for guests. The wine stain that was meant to mark me as worthless, instead, marked the beginning of something worthwhile. Every time I look at that framed dress, I remember that sometimes the worst moments become the most important ones. As I watch the sunset from my office window, painting the city in gold and amber, I think about all the service workers heading home from their shifts across the city. They deserve more than minimum wage and maximum disrespect. They deserve dignity, opportunity, recognition of their essential role in making the city function. The Grandview is just one hotel, our story, just one example. But change always starts somewhere, with someone willing to stand up and say enough. That night I was called worthless trash. Tonight I know my worth isn't measured in money or status, but in the lives we've changed, the dignity we've restored, the future we're building. Every time I walk through my hotel lobby now, I remember that night. Not with bitterness, but with gratitude. Because sometimes you need to be called worthless trash to remember that your worth was never determined by their words, but by your own actions. And tonight, as I watch the sunset from my office on the 45th floor, I know that the best revenge isn't proving them wrong. It's proving to yourself that you were right all along. If you've ever been dismissed, diminished, or disrespected because of your job, your appearance, or your perceived status, know this. Your worth is inherent, unshakable, and waiting to be revealed. Sometimes it takes a wine stain to show the world who really has class. What moment in your life revealed someone's true character? Have you ever stood up to someone who treated service workers poorly? Share your story in the comments below, and let's continue this conversation about dignity, respect, and the real meaning of worth. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content about standing up, speaking out, and creating change. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that their worth isn't determined by others' opinions. Thank you for watching. And remember, true class isn't about what you wear or what you own, but how you treat people who can do nothing for you. Until next time, stand tall, stay strong, and never let anyone make you feel worthless.